The rescue. The prairie stretched wide beneath a bruised sky, its grasses trembling in the breath of an approaching storm. Elena Whitmore paused at the edge of the homestead field, her fingers aching from the weight of the bucket she carried. Behind her, the house stood plain and serviceable, just as her husband Thomas preferred: sturdy timber, no ornament, no warmth beyond necessity. Elena had lived in that house for 4 years, yet it had never felt like hers. She lifted her gaze toward the horizon, searching for something she could not name. Loneliness pressed upon her shoulders heavier than the bucket in her hand. Thomas, though a hard-working man, treated marriage like a ledger. Duties performed, obligations met. No room for tenderness. Elena had once mistaken his silence for strength. Now she understood it as distance. The earth gave a low groan. Startled, she looked across the swale where rainwater gathered after storms. At first she thought she saw an animal struggling in the mud, but then a voice, raw, desperate, carried to her ears. A man. She dropped the bucket and ran. The sight froze her. A warrior thrashed in a pit of quicksand, chest deep, his arms striking wildly against the pull of the mire. His skin was bronze beneath streaks of mud. His dark hair clung in ropes across his forehead. Even from several yards away, she recognized the ornaments of his people, the Comanche. Fear clenched her throat. Stories of raids and vengeance had traveled with every wagon train. Her mind screamed to turn back, but his eyes found hers. They were fierce, burning with the instinct to live, yet there was no hatred in them. Only a plea. Elena stood trembling. Helping him would be betrayal of her people, of Thomas, of her vows. Yet to walk away, to let a man sink into the earth before her eyes, could she bear that guilt? Rope, he gasped, struggling to form the English word. Her pulse hammered, but her body moved before her thoughts caught up. She ran to the fence line, seized the coil of rope Thomas kept for the mules, and returned. Her skirts dragged heavy in the mud as she flung one end toward the warrior. He caught it with surprising strength, muscles straining as he fought the mire's grip. She braced herself, digging heels into wet soil, hauling back with all the force she possessed. Inch by inch, he rose, the muck releasing him with wet snarls. Finally, he collapsed onto the bank, chest heaving. Elena stumbled beside him, mud streaking her hands, her breath ragged. For a moment, neither spoke. The storm growled closer, lightning tracing the horizon. She could see him clearly now, the sharp line of his jaw, the scar above one brow, the defiant set of his mouth, even in exhaustion. He was young, perhaps no older than Thomas, but carried himself with an intensity her husband had never shown. His English was broken, but enough. Saved. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to rise, to run home before Thomas returned, before anyone discovered what she had done. But she lingered, drawn by something in his gaze. Gratitude mingled with curiosity, and beneath it, something she could not name. "You should go," she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency. "If my husband finds you here." The warrior pushed himself upright, unsteady but proud. He pressed a hand against his chest in a gesture of respect. "Kael," he said, naming himself. "Elena," she replied before she could stop herself. The exchange hung between them like an oath. Then Kael nodded once, his eyes never leaving hers, and disappeared into the tall grass with the silent swiftness of a predator. Elena remained kneeling, heart thrumming. She had done what conscience demanded, yet dread coiled in her stomach. Saving him was dangerous. Knowing his name was perilous. But what unsettled her most was not fear of discovery. It was the strange fire that had sparked when their eyes met, a heat she had never felt even in the quiet safety of her marriage bed. She rose at last, wiping mud from her palms onto her skirts. The storm broke overhead, and rain poured down in sheets, washing the prairie clean. Yet no rain could wash away what she had done. Somewhere out there, Kael lived because of her choice. Somewhere out there, the world had shifted, and she could not turn it back. When she returned to the homestead, Thomas was still at the far field, driving the plow, his figure bent and small against the rain. She watched him a moment, then entered the house, silent as a thief with a secret. Night fell heavy. Thunder rolled across the plains, rattling shutters. Elena lay beside her husband, who had fallen in his sleep without a word. She stared into the darkness, her mind returning again and again to the warrior's eyes, to the way he had spoken her name. The prairie was wide, the night endless, and she knew deep within that this was not the last she would see of Kael. The return. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the sodden ground and swollen streams. Elena moved through the homestead with a careful calm, determined to bury the memory of the man she had pulled from the quicksand. She told herself it was finished. She had done what any Christian woman should, saved a life and sent it away. Yet even as she churned butter, mended clothes, or fetched water, Kael's image intruded, unbidden. His eyes had burned into her, not with menace, but with a recognition she had never known from Thomas. 2 days later, the horizon darkened, not with storm, but with riders. Elena froze where she stood at the doorway. A column of Comanche warriors approached, their horses swift and sure-footed, their silhouettes sharp against the late afternoon sun. Fear shot through her chest like lightning. She had heard tales of such arrivals ending in fire and blood. Thomas emerged from the barn, axe in hand, face set in grim resolve. Inside, he ordered. Elena obeyed, but she lingered at the window, heart hammering. The riders drew close, and she recognized Kael among them. The tribe did not attack. Instead, they halted in a semicircle, their leader raising a hand in a gesture that was neither threat nor surrender. Kael dismounted, stepping forward with deliberate calm. He carried no weapon in hand, only dignity. Thomas stood rigid, axe lowered but ready. Kael spoke in his tongue, then in broken English, gratitude. He gestured toward Elena, his gaze steady on the house. She saved me. Heat surged in Elena's face. Thomas stiffened, turning toward her in disbelief. She forced herself to step outside, each movement heavy with dread. "It is true," she admitted softly. "I found him caught in the mire. I could not let him die." For a long moment, silence pressed upon them. Then the Comanche leader inclined his head in solemn acknowledgement. One by one, the riders followed suit, a display of respect that unsettled Thomas more than hostility would have. Without another word, the tribe wheeled their horses and rode back toward the horizon. All except Kael. He lingered a heartbeat longer, his eyes never leaving Elena's. In that look was a silent message. Unfinished business, unspoken connection. Then he, too, turned and rode away. Thomas's voice broke the silence, hard and sharp. "You risked everything. Do you know what they could have done?" Elena lowered her gaze. "I could not stand by and watch a man die. That man was Comanche." His words carried bitterness, but beneath them was something else. Fear, perhaps even helplessness. "Next time, think of this house before you act on pity." Elena did not answer. She felt the weight of his disappointment, yet it only deepened the hollow inside her. She had saved a life, and for that she was scolded like a child. That evening, Thomas busied himself with mending tools, his silence sharper than anger. Elena sat by the fire, her hands folded, her mind elsewhere. She could still see Kael's expression as he looked at her, the recognition, the gratitude, and something deeper, as if he alone could see the loneliness she kept hidden. When night fell, she slipped outside, craving the cool air. The prairie was alive with the sound of insects and the distant howl of a coyote. She wandered toward the fence line where she had first flung the rope. There, in the hush of moonlight, memory came alive again. The way his hand had gripped the rope, the power in his shoulders as he fought free, the quiet strength in his voice as he spoke her name. Elena. She spun, heart leaping. He was there, half shadow, half moonlight, Kael. How he had come so silently, she could not guess. Fear and longing tangled within her. "You should not be here," she whispered, yet her voice betrayed relief. "I came to see you." His words were halting but earnest. "You gave me life. I cannot forget." Her breath caught. Every rule of loyalty, every vow of marriage stood between them, yet she could not force herself to retreat. The distance Thomas had built in 4 years seemed to vanish in a heartbeat before Kael's gaze. "You must go," she said again, though weaker this time. "If Thomas sees, I will go." He took a step closer, enough that she could see the glint of moonlight in his eyes. But not forever. With that promise, he slipped back into the darkness, leaving her trembling at the fence line. Elena pressed her hands to her face, torn between dread and exhilaration. She had thought her life a settled matter, a narrow path she would walk until death. Yet Kael's presence had cracked it open, revealing a world she had never dared imagine. As she returned to the house, her heart pounded with a rhythm she could not silence. Thomas slept heavily, unaware. Elena lay beside him, staring into the dark, every nerve alive with forbidden anticipation. Kael would return. She knew it as surely as she knew the prairie wind would rise again. And when he did, she feared she would no longer have the strength to send him away. The forbidden night. The days that followed unfolded with deceptive calm. Thomas rose before dawn, bent his back to the soil, and returned at dusk with silence clinging to him like dust. Elena carried on her duties as expected, cooking, sewing, tending the garden. But every task felt hollow, performed with hands that remembered another touch. Her heart lived in the shadows, waiting for a presence that both terrified and thrilled her. Kael haunted her thoughts. She tried to banish his image, the fierce line of his jaw, the gravity in his gaze, the solemn gratitude in his voice, but memory refused to obey. At night, she lay beside her husband, the gulf between them as wide as the prairie itself, and she wondered how much longer she could endure the emptiness. One evening, while Thomas lingered at the far field repairing the fence, Elena walked to the edge of the woods. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in embers. She had told herself she sought only fresh air, only solitude. Yet when Kael emerged from the trees, she knew the lie she had crafted. He stood tall, his presence quiet yet commanding, a man shaped by freedom and hardship. No words were needed at first. The silence between them brimmed with everything left unsaid. Finally, he spoke in halting English. "I should not come. Danger for you. For me. And yet you did," she whispered, her pulse thrumming. His mouth curved, not quite a smile, more the acknowledgement of truth. "Because I must." The confession shattered her last defense. Elena's breath caught, and she turned as if to flee, but his hand caught hers. His touch was warm, grounding, impossible to deny. She faced him again, eyes wide, heart pounding like thunder. "You are bound," Kael said softly, glancing toward the homestead in the distance. "But your eyes, they are free." The words pierced her. She had never been spoken to as if her soul itself mattered. She had been wife, helper, companion in labor, but never seen. Tears pricked at her eyes, though she fought them. "Elena," he murmured, the name rolling from his tongue like a vow. The last of her resolve crumbled. She leaned into him, and his lips found hers, hesitant at first, then urgent, claiming what both had long denied. The world around them dissolved, the whisper of wind in the grass, the dying light of day, even the memory of duty. All that remained was the fire between them, fierce and forbidden. They sank into the shelter of the tall grass, hidden from the homestead. Each touch was discovery, each kiss a defiance. Elena's heart soared with a passion she had never known, her body awakening under his hands. For the first time since her marriage, she felt not like a tool of duty but like a woman alive. Yet even as she yielded, guilt coiled beneath the ecstasy. Every whispered word, every stolen breath was betrayal of the man who slept under the same roof as she. But when Kael whispered, "You are my dawn," she silenced the voice of conscience and surrendered to the night. Later, lying against him, the prairie sky stretching endless above, Elena shivered not from cold but from the weight of what she had done. Kael's arm encircled her protectively, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. For a fleeting hour, she belonged nowhere but here. But reality pressed close. Thomas would soon return, and discovery meant ruin. She pulled herself from Kael's embrace, her eyes wide with fear. "I must go." His hand lingered at her wrist, reluctant to release her. "I will see you again," he said, certainty blazing in his tone. Her heart ached. She wanted to say no, to sever the bond before it destroyed them both. Instead, she nodded, unable to lie even to herself. Elena hurried back across the fields, her dress disheveled, hair wild from the wind. She paused at the doorway to compose herself, forcing calm into her features. When Thomas entered minutes later, weary from work, he scarcely glanced at her. Relief mingled with shame. He had not noticed. But how long until he did? That night, Thomas fell into sleep as usual, his back turned to her. Elena lay awake, staring into the darkness, Kael's touch burning still upon her skin. She had crossed the threshold from which there was no return. The prairie wind moaned against the shutters, a lonely sound that mirrored the turmoil within her. She knew the path ahead was perilous, but the taste of passion had forever changed her. She was no longer only Thomas's wife. She was a woman who had chosen desire over duty, and the cost of that choice had yet to be revealed. The price of desire. The days that followed their night of surrender were filled with restless silence. Elena moved through the house as though walking a narrow plank, each step careful, each glance toward Thomas fraught with fear of discovery. She tried to lose herself in daily tasks, but her thoughts betrayed her at every turn. When she needed bread, she remembered Kael's hands steadying her wrist. When she hung laundry in the wind, she recalled the warmth of his breath on her neck. Passion had branded her soul, and no effort could erase it. Thomas sensed the change. He was not a man of words, but his watchful silence spoke louder than accusations. At supper, his gaze lingered too long. At night, though he turned to sleep as always, his breathing carried an edge of unease. The gulf between them, once numb and ordinary, had grown jagged, dangerous. Mara, Elena's friend from a neighboring homestead, arrived one afternoon with mended cloth. She studied Elena with sharp eyes, her voice cautious. "You seem different," as though carrying something heavy. Elena forced a smile, but her trembling fingers betrayed her. Mara touched her hand. "Secrets are weightier than stone. Be careful, Elena. The prairie has ears." The warning rang in Elena's mind long after Mara left. She knew her friend had guessed more than she had spoken. Shame pressed on her, yet the memory of Kael's lips could still melt her resolve. Desire and guilt warred within, leaving her unmoored. One evening, Kael appeared again at the edge of the field. The setting sun bled across the sky, gilding his figure in fire. Elena felt her heart leap against her ribs. She wanted to run to him, to vanish into the embrace she craved. Yet she also knew the risk had sharpened into something near fatal. "You should not have come," she whispered as she reached him beneath the shelter of the trees. "I could not stay away." His eyes held hers, steady and fierce. "You are my life now." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, to surrender again to the wild, consuming passion. But fear gnawed at her. Thomas grows suspicious. Mara watches me with questions. If we are discovered, Kael silenced her with a gentle hand against her cheek. "I will protect you. My people would welcome you. You would not live in silence." For a heartbeat, the vision tempted her, a life beyond the farm, free among riders who valued spirit over duty. Yet behind her rose the outline of the homestead, the life she had built, the vows she had spoken. Could she abandon it all for desire? Before she could answer, a sound cut through the air, the unmistakable snap of a twig. Elena stiffened. Thomas stood several yards away, axe in hand, his face a storm of betrayal. "Elena," he said, his voice raw, "what have you done?" Her blood froze. Words fled her. Kael stepped forward, protective, but Elena thrust a hand against his chest, begging him silently not to provoke violence. Thomas's eyes, once dull with indifference, now blazed with fury and hurt. "I worked this land for you, gave you a home, and this is how you repay me?" Tears welled in Elena's eyes. She opened her mouth, but no explanation could mend the fracture. The truth hung heavy between them, undeniable. Kael's gaze swept from Thomas to Elena, then back. For the first time, uncertainty shadowed his face. He reached for her hand, but Elena pulled away, trembling. She understood now that whichever choice she made would wound her deeply. To stay with Kael meant exile from everything she had known. To remain with Thomas meant a life stripped of passion, forever haunted by what she had tasted. Her voice faltered. I cannot undo what has been done. The silence that followed was more devastating than anger. Thomas lowered his axe slowly, his jaw clenched, and turned away. Without another word, he walked back toward the homestead, his figure stiff and solitary. Elena stood frozen, torn between following him and collapsing into Kael's arms. But Kael, too, read the truth in her hesitation. He released a long breath, then pressed her hand once, firmly, as though sealing a memory. I will not forget you, he said quietly, but I will not bring you ruin. With that, he mounted his horse and disappeared into the rising dusk, leaving Elena trembling in the field. She returned to the house hours later. Thomas was inside, silent, his back turned as he mended gear by firelight. He did not look up when she entered. The space between them had never been wider. Elena sat alone at the table, staring at her hands. Passion had awakened her, but at the cost of peace. She was both liberated and imprisoned, both cherished and condemned. The night pressed close, heavy with secrets, and she knew the path ahead would not grant her rest. For desire had claimed her heart, and its price would echo through every step of her days.